This is BBC World News and Hard Talk with Carrie Gracie.
Will Bahrain's spring ever see summer? The answer may lie in the so-called national dialogue, which the government has just begun with the opposition. But many of the protesters who took to the streets earlier this year remain under arrest, and troops from Saudi Arabia, brought in to suppress the democracy movement, are still stationed in their tiny neighbour. My guest today is a former MP with Bahrain's largest Shia group, the Al-Wefaq party. Jassim Hussain resigned after the violent suppression of the protests. Can talking now overcome the divisions between Sunni and Shia and the scheming of arch rivals Iran and Saudi Arabia? Jassim Hussain, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Now, your party, Al-Wefaq, joined the talks at the last moment, and one leading member, Khalil Al-Mazouk, said this dialogue will not lead to a solution. It does not fulfil the needs to pull Bahrain out of its political crisis. So what made you join?
To demonstrate that the party has always been willing to assume peaceful measures for solving the challenges facing the country. The talks could serve as a prelude for possibly future talks with the real stakeholders in the issues facing the country.
So a prelude, so these are not real talks, they're just some kind of a curtain raiser for real talks that might follow?
Well, there are real talks, but there are many individuals who possibly have no business in this and yet are involved in the talks.
Yes, because there are 300 participants, of whom only about 35 are members of the opposition. I mean, you're outnumbered by 9 to 1.
Yeah, and my party really, we got 18 out of 40 seats in the national election in 2010. We got 63% of the popular votes. Yet we only have 5 out of 300 seats in the national dialogue. Still, we have shown that, as always, ready to talk and give peace a chance.
And are you always ready to talk, or are there red lines that you won't cross, things that might make you quit?
Well, always prepared to talk, and we want to tell the authorities that talk should be a rule rather than an exception.
Is that a rule they need to learn?
Well, the rule is that there is no point using violence and really suppressing demands and or political issues facing the country. I think the authorities possibly have learned the lesson that it was a mistake to use violence in the first place.
And yet I suppose the problem possibly with talking is that it becomes an excuse for inaction. Just to quote you, Shadi Hamid, for example, Director of Research at the Brookings Doha Centre, says, "It's what Arab regimes are good at, embarking on reform and doing the right gesture. The fundamental power structure doesn't change in any way."
Possibly, but time has changed. This is the age of globalization. Information goes around very quickly. And authorities do realize that the international community is really paying attention to what's happening in Bahrain. It's not just Bahrain, has really spillover effects in Saudi and other places. So, the authorities have to offer something this time.
And what is it that they have to offer?
At the stakes are some major issues. One is to have a parliament with full authorities. At the moment, really, there is an appointed, what is known as the Shura Council, shares power with the elected body. Certainly, this is something many people are not happy with.
So you want to get rid of the upper chamber or the Shura Council
altogether? The Shura
altogether?
Council should be totally. There is no point for that. The parliament should reflect the views of the people. The authorities have the cabinet. There is no point having an appointed Shura Council really sharing power with the elected.
And what about the king's role then?
Well, we need the king. The king really is a source of stability for the country, and the president has made it very clear that we want changes within rather than changes of the regime. But we want to have proper institutions in the place, like a fully empowered parliament, districts that are representative of the society. We need the universal principle of one person, one vote, which we've been lacking in the country.
Lacking in what way? I mean, you have constituencies. Are you saying the constituencies don't fairly represent the demographic where the people are?
Yes, in fact, my party, we got 63% of the popular votes in 2010. But we only managed to secure 45% of the seats, really. We have one district in the northern, really, represented by MP Matar, sadly, who is behind bars now, really. His district equals 5 others in the southern governorate, really. So we really have a real problem with the gerrymandering of districts. And
going back to the King, I mean, of course, currently he has a veto on what goes through Parliament. What's going to happen to that under your version? We need to streamline some of the things. I think with fully empowered parliament, things could change, really. A parliament could then also really have a say in the formation of the government, which currently we don't have that. Well, of course, when you say we don't have that, of course, we, in your case, don't have anything right now because you resigned, among others, from the Parliament. You're not even sitting in it. They now have to have by-elections for the seats which your party withdrew from. Yeah, we resigned to protest the crackdown. We thought it was a mistake for the authorities to use violence to solve a political problem, really. But said we could always go back and run again, should the time come. So you might stand in those by-elections for the seats that you withdrew from? Not the September one. The September, the decision is not to join. Unless things change dramatically, really, over the course of the next few weeks. Hopefully, but that's very unlikely. But we're looking forward. Look forward down the road, really. The districts have to be redrawn, and then the opposition can really take part, and that way we can really address the challenges. And yet, the way that you're talking, the demands that you're making, it sounds really as if it's all the issues that there were before the demonstrations in February and before the crackdown in March. And of course, since then, we've seen more than 30 people killed. We've seen Gulf troops, most of them from Saudi Arabia, 1,000 or so of them inside Bahrain. We've seen many alleged abuses taking place. We've seen detentions. We've seen trials. A lot of people are still on trial. Surely we can't go back in terms of the discussions taking place now, the dialogue taking place now. You can't exactly go back to the situation before February. Yes, definitely. Now things have changed, and now what's needed is the authorities making more concessions, because it was their mistake to use violence. They killed more than 30 people, including 4 under custody, really, which was certainly there was no point for doing so. Bringing in Saudi troops, further complicating the way out, really. But still, the issues are the same. People have been demanding this, over the last three decades, really. The time has changed, but not the issues. I'm interested that among your issues for dialogue are not, you don't raise as a priority the independent commission that's being discussed for investigating the allegations of human rights abuses that have taken place since March. I mean, just to quote you, for example, Jonathan Whittle, who is head of mission for Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders in Bahrain, he said troops routinely tortured patients at the Salmania medical complex. To quote him, the security forces basically took control of the hospital on the 17th of March. Tanks moved outside, set up checkpoints for anyone entering or leaving. Inside, many of the wounded with injuries that could have been sustained during the protests were taken to the 6th floor, where they were beaten 3 times a day. And to quote one of the doctors, released on bail this month only to await trial after spending 3 months in detention, told the BBC he'd been handcuffed, blindfolded and beaten. He said, they were forcing me to confess that we'd killed some of those who've died. So for you, you're saying we go into dialogue and the issues are the same, but one can only imagine that for those people awaiting trial or already sentenced to life imprisonment in some cases, the issues are not the same. Definitely, we had fresh issues. Really, we have now things have been added to the original issues. Now, with regards to the commission, we welcome that. We were looking for a UN-led, really independent, impartial commission. And you didn't get it. We didn't get it, but thankfully the king, did establish this commission, really, and we hope there are some very influential people with really very well-known individuals are part of the commission. And is hoping the best you can do, or are you putting forward a list of people you'd like to see on the commission?
Really, they certainly are free, really independent. We don't influence, but their work. But certainly, we care about the outcome. We think the outcome should really tackle, those who've really committed the crimes, killed the people, imprisoned people, really unlawfully, torturing really of physicians
and do you think that's possible? I mean, just another quote this time. Human Rights Watch said in a briefing paper last week, the Bahrain government since March 2011 has been carrying out a punitive and vindictive campaign of violent repression against its own citizens. I mean, if the scale of abuse is as wide as it's describing there, then surely it would be hard for the authorities to really get to the bottom of it. Do you think the truth can come out of such a process?
Possibly not the whole truth, but possibly partial of the truth.
So there'll be some fall guys?
I think so, yes. There will be some scapegoats as well. Some people could be used, as,
And that's okay?
Well, certainly it's not the best, but certainly we have to go on really now. We have to address the issue. There are lots of issues facing the country. And I think, again, it shows that the position really Bahrain really has been and still is uniquely peaceful in its demand.
And you don't feel it would have been right to hold off from joining the dialogue until you'd seen the outcome of the report, or indeed until you'd seen more of the changes that you want to see?
Possibly, but certainly, again, I think it just demonstrates that the opposition has been calling and really made good on the promise of accepting really offers that are designed to solve problems. Some are not happy. There are some who think it was wrong to join, but really the mainstream opposition led by Al-Wefaq, my organization, really, again, we have shown our willingness to embrace calls for change.
And yet what has been achieved? I mean, it's a concession for people like you to go into a dialogue in this circumstances. What can you show your supporters in exchange for that concession?
I think the authorities have done also some good measures over the last few days, releasing some people from jail. That is something we really welcome that. We think all people should be released. There should be no person behind bar for expressing their views. Ending the military tribunal. Now the king has ordered that all cases have to go before civilian court. Again, something welcome. Formation of the commission, another useful measure. So, already some positive outcome has been achieved.
And yet, I mean, alongside the allegations of abuses we've been talking about, I mean, another issue is that many people lost their jobs as a result of the protests, were summarily sacked, and many other students lost their places at university. Are you campaigning for them to be reinstated?
Well, in fact, the king himself has said that he's ordered the authorities to rethink the strategy, and now I think it is up to the authorities to make good on the promise that people should be back to their jobs. The students should really again go back to the schools. Really, we have students who are at the last year of their graduation. Really, the future leaders of the country. Really, so terrible mistakes by the authorities. Very quick decisions. Sacking people, expelling students. In addition to other mistakes, including bringing Saudi troops into Bahrain.
Well, and talking about the Saudi troops, I mean, some of them, we understand, are still there. The authorities seem a little cagey on exactly how many and where, but they certainly haven't said that they've all left. I mean, to quote you, Marina Ottaway, Director of the Middle East Programme at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, there are Saudi fingerprints, she says, all over Bahrain's so-called national dialogue. The suggestion there that there are a lot of foreign players here, Saudi's chief among them.
That's true. I think this was Bahrain's case was a local problem, but apparently the solution is no longer local. It's like more of a regional solution to the problem. Thanks to the mistakes by the authorities, really, by bringing the Saudi troops, really. Yes, we can see signs of Saudi troops, really. Destruction of some Shia, really, shrines in Bahrain. Tens of shrines have been destructed, really. Apparently, because of this, some Wahhabi thought imported from Saudi.
And is it imported? You don't see a problem, a sectarian problem at home? Because, I mean, there is a report by the Gulf Center for Democratic Development in 2006 claimed there was an official policy designed to marginalise Shias and promote conversions to Sunni Islam.
Not really, but I think the authorities in Bahrain have always appreciated, the reality on the ground that, Shias, have their own positions, that they have to be respected. So we had no problem. It was only when the Saudi troops came in, we realized this change of policy, really. And I think the authorities now regret that. And the king himself has said that they are going to look into rebuilding, all these, but through legal channels. This so this was really a terrible mistake of bringing, as we said, really now further complicating the problem. By bringing Saudi troops, we also had like a sort of rivalry between Saudi and Iran.
Well, that's the other big regional player that we need to mention, because, of course, Manama has repeatedly accused Iran of inciting revolt. Last October, I mean, well before the democracy protests, there were Shia activists on trial for alleged involvement in an Iranian coup attempt in Bahrain, and that, of course, brings back memories of the 1981 coup attempt in Bahrain. So this is a constant thread, isn't it? Saudi involvement, Iranian involvement.
But not to that extent. This time now the two countries are engaged in a cold war on Bahrain soil, adding to the problems they are having elsewhere in the region, in Lebanon, in Iraq, Afghanistan. Really, the authorities really made, really provided a new ground for the two countries to fight on.
And you think it's the authorities which did that? There wasn't a problem to begin with? Because just to quote you, opposition leader Hassan Mashaima, who of course was sentenced last month to life in prison for allegedly plotting to overthrow the government. Now, he said back in early March, at the height of the unrest, if the Saudi military interferes in the internal affairs of Bahrain, the Iranian army has the right to interfere in Bahrain affairs to support the protesters.
I don't think Israel made that statement, but the understanding by inviting the Saudis coming in, the authorities already indirectly have invited the Iranians to intervene. Really, it's more of now media war between the two countries rather than actual really armies facing each other.
Do you think it's do you think it's coming from Iran and Saudi, or is it when the government in Bahrain needs to justify what it does, it starts talking about Iranian meddling? I mean, I suppose I'm asking you whether you think the Iranians are getting involved actively, or whether they're being dragged in as a pretext by the king.
We had really statements made by Washington and London, really suggesting very clearly that Iran was not behind the problem. It was local issues.
Well, except that Robert Gates, the then US Defence Secretary, said we already have evidence that the Iranians are trying to exploit the situation.
I think that's quite true. I think they've really used the media to take advantage, but they were not behind. They were not the instigators in the first place, and I said the invitation of Saudi troops only further really, complicated the matters and allowed the Iranian intervention, so to speak.
It's not easy to see how you keep them out, though, is it? Because the Saudis, for their part, seem to see any threat to a monarchy in the area as a threat to the idea of monarchy in the area at all. So if they see a threat to Bahrain's ruling family, they see that as a threat to their own.
I think that's true, really. I think possibly the Saudis have really sent the troops to protect their own area, really, in the Shias in the eastern district,
and an eastern district which has most of their reserves of oil. So it's not just a demographic we're talking about.
Yeah, very important part of the world, really. But I think it was very understandable for Saudis to come in and provide assistance, but political assistance rather than military solution to a political problem, and that was the mistake. Saudi is very important to Bahrain in many areas, really, with regards to Bahrain's economy and really well-being, but not to really to the extent of allowing these troops to come in without people's knowledge. People were not consulted for this.
So if the Saudis stay longer, and as we were saying, there's no sign of them immediately going home, do you think there is a danger then that radicalises the Shia public and pushes them more into the embrace of Tehran?
Possibly, at least for some, but the longer the Saudis remain, the longer we're going to see Bahrain being really at the center of rivalry between Tehran and Riyadh. So it's better for Saudis to leave, in order not to give the Iranians the excuse of really going after Bahrain so much.
And the United States, because of course we have mentioned them, but their position is the other big player, the US Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain. It's expressed concern, but public comments have been, well, by comparison to Libya, very muted. It's conspicuously failed to support the demands of the protesters. Are you disappointed by that?
No, I think the Americans have come out very strongly in favor of change, of not using violence, really, with regards to the opposition, really. The Americans do appreciate that, they have Bahrain as home to the Fifth Fleet, but that sustaining that requires Bahrain being a stable country. And stability could not come while the majority of people are not happy. So the 30s really, so this is why the Americans, I think, they do care about stability, which means end of some of the mistakes in the country, including discrimination against the Shia and some of the virtues of equal opportunity for all. So I think the Americans are really doing a good job.
I'm interested that you say they come out strongly, because, I mean, if you compare it to Libya, you compare what they've done in Bahrain with what they've done in Libya, there is no comparison.
Yeah, totally different situation. But this is the first time the Americans have come out so strongly in favor of change in Bahrain. Also, we had the British coming out, really a conservative government, in the UK, really making tough statements about Bahrain and really condemning the use of violence. Really. So I think both London and Washington have really come out in support of the just demand. But certainly, we'll have to take into account that Libya is different from Bahrain.
And what about the Arab reaction? Because Arab leaders, by and large, supporting the government in Bahrain as well. Only Iraq's Shia Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, daring to criticise the crackdown. Do you think there is a lesson that for Western and Arab governments, oil is more pressing than democracy? Democracy nice, but oil more pressing?
I think that's true, yeah. Sadly, that's the case, really. And I think mainly because of Saudi pressure on this count, because Saudis came in force in Bahrain, and Saudi being the largest oil exporter in the world, so it means a lot.
And the White House, just to quote it again on that, just pressing on this question of when the chips are down and you need support from Washington, they're thinking on the importance of oil or the importance of their strategic position and the importance of democratic progress. Bahrain, a long-standing partner, we are committed to its security. We recognise Iran's tried to take advantage of turmoil there, and that the Bahraini government has a legitimate interest in the rule of law.
Yes, in the rule of law, but certainly not to the point of using violence against people or killing 4 people behind bars, really.
So your view is that the Americans are taking a pragmatic and acceptable position, that on the one hand, caring about the human rights and political liberties of Bahrainis, while at the same time protecting their own natural national interest.
Very much so, yes. I think, yes. And I think, in fact, I'm quite, many people are very thankful to the position of the US with regards to events in Bahrain. They do understand. I think the Americans are very much aware of what's going on in the country, and their support for the Crown Prince, in fact, for Bahrain's Crown Prince, in really bringing about change, in the country.
So at this stage, coming back to where we started, at this stage in the national dialogue, what confidence do you have that someone like yourself can be back sitting in Parliament again within the foreseeable future?
I have so much confidence in the King on the one hand, but more importantly in the Crown Prince. I think Crown Prince, Salman really understands and appreciates, and he realizes that Bahrain has to change in order to become really flourishing economy, really stand out, in the region. And what's required really is to make some major, to make concessions that meet the legitimate demands of the Bahraini people.
And yet, small place, one individual there in the Crown Prince, small population, and hemmed in by these huge neighbours, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and of course the vital interests of the United States. How confident are you that Bahrainis at the end will decide the destiny of Bahrain?
I'm confident because of Bahrain's, really, the people being very much educated, well-travelled, experienced. Bahrain has always been at the forefront of change in the region in terms of education, administration, and people by nature are not sectarian. People have been living, Shias and Sunnis have been side by side for decades, really. And someone like the Crown Prince, who's really Western educated, who understands the challenges. So, all of these together give me hope that Bahrain is heading for a soft landing.
Jassim, Hussain, thank you so much for joining us on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.